Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. Today, I want to bring you along as I explore a popular legend, the 350 legend to be precise. When the 350 Legend cartridge was introduced, some very impressive statistics were published comparing its performance characteristics to other carbine platform cartridges. I have not attempted to independently validate any of those statistics, so I will not reiterate them here. However, at the risk of stating the obvious, I would like to point out that the 350 Legend provides a larger bore alternative to 223 that does not reduce magazine capacity as cartridges like the 450 Bushmaster or 450 SOCOM necessarily do. And it is a straight-walled cartridge, which is an added benefit for hand loaders because there are a few less things that can go wrong when hand loading straight-walled cartridges versus bottleneck cartridges, and that makes reloading marginally easier. To me, this alone makes the Legend a very attractive concept. I was pleasantly surprised with how quickly the industry seemed to embrace the new cartridge and how soon barrels and complete uppers chambered for it became available at very reasonable prices. It seems like there are a lot of options available for anyone who wants to buy or build a rifle in 350, and my intent in this video is not to discuss them all. Instead, suffice it to say that I picked up an inexpensive upper and installed it on a rifle that I already had. That was the easy part. Then came the problem of figuring out how to actualize the obvious potential of the cartridge, and that proved to be a great deal more difficult than I had expected, so that is what I am going to spend the remainder of this video discussing. Having a rifle in 350 Legend, I now needed ammunition in 350 Legend. There are a few factory loads available for the cartridge at prices that are comparable to other commercial hunting rifle ammunition. That is to say, the ammo is affordable if you only need a couple boxes a year to check the zero on your scope and then go harvest a whitetail during deer season. But if you actually want to use the rifle for routine practice, especially in the tradition of tactical carbines, then shooting factory ammo would rapidly get prohibitively expensive. As such, I determined I would need to hand load my own ammo. In order to start hand loading the Legend, the first thing I needed was brass cases. It looks like new unfired 350 Legend brass can be purchased from a couple of different sources, but again, the cost is not insignificant. And the dimensions of the cartridge are sufficiently similar to the 223 that I decided to see if I could make 350 Legend cases out of spent 223 brass, of which I have an abundance. Thus, I made a special expander die to neck up a 223 case to 0.356 inches. I suspect that expander dies like this are also commercially available, but I didn't actually check because they are also really easy to make if you have a lathe, which I do. I found that when a 223 case is run through the expander die, one of three things will happen. Either the case will neck up properly, or it will split, or the shoulder will fold back on itself. With a random sample of spent 223 brass, roughly 1 out of 3 expanded correctly, while the other 2 usually split. I found that if I annealed the cases prior to running them through the expander die, then they would roll in on themselves instead of splitting, but this still made for an unusable case. Thus, I needed a way to anneal the mouth of the case without annealing the shoulder. Eventually, I figured out that if I filled a plastic shell organizer with water, and then with empty cases, I could then use an oxyacetylene torch to anneal the case mouths without overheating the case shoulders. After discovering this, and with a little practice, I was able to form 350 Legend cases from spent 223 brass with about a 90% success rate. Powder and primers, of course, are standard components that I had on hand, so that was not a problem. As to bullets, some people have criticized Winchester for specifying a .356 diameter bullet for the Legend rather than the .358-inch diameter used by many other .35 caliber rifle cartridges. I, however, would point out that it is trivially easy to take a .357 or .358-inch bullet and run it through a sizing die to reduce its diameter to .356 inches. Thus, between all the .356, .357, and .358 diameter bullets on the market, there's a pretty broad selection of bullets available to the hand loader for loading 350 Legend. Of course, one also needs reloading dies in order to turn reloading components into functional ammunition. It looks like there are a limited selection of steel dies for the 350 Legend on the market, but I was disappointed to see that nobody seems to offer a competitively priced carbide sizing die for it. However, I already had a carbide sizing die for reloading 357 Magnum, which has an outside diameter very close to that of the Legend. I decided to see if it would work for sizing the Legend brass, and it actually seems to work just fine. Combine that with the neck expanding die that I had already made, the bullet seating die from the 357 Magnum set, and a separate taper crimping die, because the seating die was for a roll crimp, and I was able to start producing ammunition. For a starting load, I selected a 158 grain copper-plated bullet propelled by about 22 grains of H110 powder. This gave a muzzle velocity just over 2,000 feet per second and seemed to provide about the right pressure for the action to cycle consistently. Thinking I had solved the ammunition problem, my next problem was magazines. 350 Legend cartridges will not stack properly in common 223 magazines. And while the industry already seems to have adapted a wide variety of firearms and components to the new cartridge, the same is unfortunately not true of magazines. I was unable to locate any source of standard capacity 350 Legend compatible magazines for my rifle. I tried taking a polymer 223 mag and grinding down the ridges in the front of the magazine with a die grinder. This almost made the shells stack correctly, but not quite. Then I tried adding some sheet metal shims on the sides of the magazine follower at the rear of the magazine. This almost worked. It made the cartridges look as if they were stacking acceptably when the magazine was loaded, but it still would not feed them reliably. Perhaps the shims just added too much friction between the follower and the magazine body. Finally, I resorted to buying a couple of the low-capacity magazines that are available on the market. I consider this a temporary fix until either someone starts manufacturing a good 30-plus round magazine for the Legend, or until I figure out how to make my own magazines from scratch. As I started shooting the Legend, however, I was hampered by feeding problems. Sometimes the gun would cycle correctly, but others it would feed a shell but fail to go all the way into battery. Eventually, through trial and error, I determined that the cause of the problem was twofold. For one thing, cases formed from 223 brass may deviate from the nominal dimensions of the 350 Legend cartridge just enough to compromise their stacking uniformity in the magazine and thereby compromise the reliability of feeding. The first time they are fired, the pressure fireforms the cases to the chamber. I observed that a small percentage of cases split near the base during fireforming, but most of them expand without splitting, conforming perfectly to the chamber dimensions. Thus, my reloaded cases fed much more reliably the second time round than the first time that I loaded them. However, after firing 30 or 40 rounds, I found that the bolt seemed to be sticking in the bolt carrier group and often would not go all the way into battery, even if it was cycled empty. Upon disassembly, I traced this problem to a buildup of copper powder in the gas piston, which is housed inside the bolt carrier. It would appear that the copper plating on the bullets I was using was literally disintegrating in the barrel and turning into a fine copper dust that was venting through the gas system and clogging up the bolt carrier group. Switching from plated bullets to bullets with a drawn copper jacket seemed to alleviate this problem. So at this point, I think I've finally got my 350 Legend rifle running reliably. I'd still like to find a better option for magazines, and I definitely want to experiment with some different hand loads for this cartridge, but I expect those will provide material for future episodes. So until next time, thanks for watching the Idahoan Show.